Hey everyone, welcome to session 67 of the Behavioral Observations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. Today's show is brought to you by HRIC of Colorado for all your BCBA recruiting needs. So whether you're looking for a job or looking to hire people, go to hricolorado.com, and we'll talk a little bit more about them later on the show. I also want to tell you about a cool training event that's coming up on November 30th. Brett Denovi and Associates are hosting a fantastic event at the Westin Hotel Conference Center in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. So if you're not in New Jersey, don't worry, because you can live stream it. So it's available online, but if you are in the area, seating will be limited. This event will feature a keynote by none other than Dr. Julie Vargas. Her talk is called Growing Up with B.F. Skinner, the Behaviorist as a Father. Dr. Vargas will be followed by talks from Brett Denovi and Matt Linder, both of Brett Denovi and Associates, and Dr. Don Hantula will provide the closing address. All in all, this will count for 5.5 supervision continuing ed hours. And best of all, the proceeds from this event will go towards supporting the B.F. Skinner Foundation. So consider attending this great event where you will learn lots of great information, all while contributing to a fantastic cause. So for more info, please go to the show notes for this episode at behavioralobservations.com and look for session 67. Okay, with regard to today's show, I am really excited to share this conversation I had with Paul Gavoni, a.k.a. Polly Gloves. He's the author of Quick Wins that he co-wrote with Manny Rodriguez. Many of you will remember Manny if you've been listening to the podcast for some period of time. And he's also the co-author of the upcoming book, Deliberate Coaching, which he co-wrote with a different podcast guest, Dr. Nick Weatherly. So we talk about that a little bit. And we also talked about that book a little bit with Nick. So if you want to learn more about that, you can go back a few episodes. But boy, we cover a lot in this episode. So rather than delay it any further, let's get right into it. If you do want to learn more about Pauly, you can go to his website, quickwinspro.com. I'll have those links in the show notes along with many of the other things that we talk about in this episode. So I guess without any further delay, let's get right to this fun conversation with Dr. Paul Gavoni, a.k.a. Polly Gloves.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, or should I say Polly Gloves. How you doing today, buddy?
Hey, I'm doing fantastic, man. It's good to see you again, man. I just saw you just yesterday, but a couple weeks ago up in Indianapolis. That was fun.
Yeah, that was a fantastic conference. I am still, my family has almost made almost like a swear jar. Like, if in other words, they're so sick of me talking about what a great time I had in Indy at the HABA conference. Okay, it's like, okay, we get it enough, but
it was good, man. I mean, Danielle and her folks just, it was big enough but intimate enough, so you really got to spend some time with folks. And I really like, some of the themes going on. And one of the things I took away from there was that, people, and something I believe as well, but people need to kind of follow their niche, which was kind of fun for me to hear other people, talking the same language.
For sure, and you've got your own niche that we're going to get into here in a second. But yeah, I think but getting back to HABA for a second, the thing I liked about that conference, I think you hit the nail on the head. There was no speaker that was unavailable to anyone who wanted to ask a question. You know what I'm saying?
I do. Yeah.
Anyone who wanted to ask you a question after your talk was able to come up to you. It wasn't crowded. In the sense that you couldn't make your way up to somebody either at the end of the talk or during one of the coffee breaks and things like that. And so I just thought that the conference had it was like the perfect size. And anyway, I just I can't thank Daniel and Kyle and all the HABA board for having us up there. It was just a fantastic time and a cool town too. I'd never been to Indy before, and I really liked it.
Man. I got to venture out for like a couple hours in between sessions, and I would really like to explore more. Somebody was telling me about a cool blues bar that was over there, and I like the live blues, so I want to hopefully I get invited back again next year because I want to go explore that. If you come in, you got to come with me.
All right, I'm in. So the audience probably doesn't want us to prattle on and on about HABA, even though we probably could, because it was a fun time. Let's start by talking about how you got into behavior analysis. Your background is probably a little bit different than the average behavior analyst walking around. So let's talk about that for a minute. So how'd you first encounter behavior analysis, and how'd you know it was something that you want to pursue as a livelihood, if you will?
Yeah, that's a cool question, man. It's something I've had to reflect on, as I continue to get older. But when I go back, obviously my history kind of leads me to this spot. But when I was young, I remember like when I was, probably like 7, 8 years old, people would ask me, what do you want to do? It's pretty young to ask somebody that, but they ask that. And I kind of always thought, like, I kind of wonder why people do the things that they do. It's a very early memory for me. Well, I got in high school and I got out of high school, and I was actually surfing at that time, and I love surfing. It's like a lifestyle. It's almost like an addiction. I'll call it addiction because that's all I want to do is surf. So, I came up from a very loving family who really wanted me to go to school. So I went to school. However, my first semester in school, where there was nobody, I wasn't required to show up for class, and I wasn't required to study. And they had end of the semester exams. Well, I came out of there with 2 F's, a D, and a B because, I'd go out and check the waves. I was running something called 976 Surf, and I would just show up and check the waves, and they'd call me in to ask me for a surf report. And if the waves were good, man, it's like, wow, I'm staying and going surf and screw this. And, I got that report card. It didn't turn out too well, but I was kind of floundering in, what do I want to do? And, I really always liked helping people. People kind of gravitated towards me for help and asked my opinions on things. And I'd gotten some help from a social work at one point in my life. And I thought, you know what? I really liked what this person did. They were a therapist, and I kind of want to do that. So I kind of fell into social work. Ended up getting my bachelor's in social work, and then my master's. And I didn't really know that much of what it was about. It just seemed like it was helping people. I did know you didn't make much money doing it, but it was good people who had kind of maybe been in it and they wanted to give back. So, and I really appreciated that. Well, I'd done some work in day treatment programs, and I had done some work in residential. It was actually with sex offenders and gang members and a bunch of different populations. Well, I ended up getting taken on as a mental health therapist and the mental health coordinator for a school down in Fort Lauderdale. And while I was working there, somebody came up to me and said, hey, there's this class you can take, and if you take it and you get the certification, you can get paid $50 an hour. And I'm like, all right, for a guy that wasn't making much money as a social worker, even though I went into the school boards making a bit more money, that sounded pretty cool. I thought, well, I'm going to get this certificate, not knowing what I was going to come across. Well, it was through a behavior analysis inc, and that was Dr. Stephen Starin. And I remember walking in the classroom and it being, just a revelation to me. It was eye-opening to me. It was like, man, it just made perfect sense to me. And it was like that thing that I finally found. And you start to, for me, it's like being, having a pair of foggy lenses on your whole life and seeing your life through that lens, then all of a sudden it's like cleanse, I don't know, like the Matrix or something like that, you're seeing like reality. So, I brought this back into what I was doing, and I was surrounded by a bunch of therapists, but nobody that was really, nobody at all that had a background in actual behavior. So I started to kind of have to think through that conceptual lens, and I toyed around with some things. Well, I ended up getting hired on as a behavior analyst up at a school district up north in Central Florida, where I was moving to. And when I came up there, now I was surrounded by some behavior folks, and I was very helpful. A good friend of mine, Frank Kukowskis, really kind of helped to mentor me and get me to think more behaviorally. I had somebody to bounce questions off of, because if you're not, you might learn a lot from the books and pass the certification exam, which, by the way, was as a BCABA. That was back in 2004. But that doesn't mean you're ready to practice. because it's a whole different world out there, and the practice is far from what you learn in the books. You have to deal with politics. You have to deal with a lot of people not understanding your approach and what you have to say. So I had to learn a lot and made a lot of mistakes along the way. So I literally learned on the job as a behavior analyst, learned how to do FBAs, learned how to do VIPs, and I look back and I'm thinking they were probably god awful.
I think we can all probably look to some of our earlier works and be at least slightly embarrassed. So yeah, I know the feeling for sure. And I think especially, we were just chatting before we recorded, we're in the same kind of generation, if you will. I think that was right when the field was kind of making that transition from, behavior modification to more, behavior analysis, if you will. And so I think the tools that we have, the methodological tools that we have at our disposal these days, I think are a lot more, again, sophisticated than some of the early behavior programs, at least I know I was a part of, with, lots and lots of, basically using blunt instruments in terms of reinforcement and timeout and things like that.
I'm glad you didn't mean smacking people in the head or anything.
No. That was a metaphor. Anti-ABA people, that's a metaphor.
Because they'll pull that out of there.
That's right. Yeah, we use blunt instruments, yeah.
When I came... When I came in, because I didn't come out of a university, I wasn't submersed in the field. And the big thing that had just come into schools was this thing called Positive Behavioral Support School-wide, PBS, and kind of made sense to me. But I knew there was a divide in the field. Because, apparently, the PBS folks were trying to say this is a different science, there's a different approach, and really it's all rooted in ABA. In fact, from my perspective, looking back, I'm like, all right, really, this is really the first application of, large-scale application of OBM in schools. So it kind of made sense to me. I didn't understand that divide. But I'm like, you know what? If we can put some good antecedent strategies in place that are going to reduce the likelihood that this behavior is going to occur, great. But we also need to shape up the other side of that and teach people how to use, that P word, punishment effectively, in the right way in the school. So they actually threw me into a school because I was having success in one of the classrooms. It was in a high poverty school, and I was a district behavior analyst. And you've probably heard me talk about this at the conference, but it was a mess, Matt. I mean, it was like I've never seen anything before like this or after, and it was what I call the perfect storm. It was brand new teachers, all first and second year teachers, and it was a brand new administration, and all the kids the county was under a court order from 3 decades ago for discrimination, and they had to bus kids to different schools. Well, that they had finally ended that, so all these neighborhood kids came back to the same school, and it was like the roof just blew off. That I'd come in the morning and there was not one child or one adult standing in the breezeway from the bus all the way down to the cafeteria, and it was concerning. There were safety issues. So that year didn't go very well for that school. The next year, I was asked by the deputy superintendent if I thought I could help the place improve, and I thought, no. What the hell am I going to do there, man? That's a mess. I said, well, if we have a team of people that goes in, and I might be able to help with the behavior. And this was my introduction to OBM, because I thought, all right, what we need is something like PBS but for adults, because the adults aren't doing the things that they need to do. And if we're going to change student behavior, I think we need to change adult behavior, because I actually had never heard of OBM before this. And somebody had given me a book called Bring Out the Best in People by Aubrey Daniels, and that was the final all right, this is me. This is what makes sense to me. It fits. And man, I just did some very, very simple approaches, which are just, really fundamental to ABA, and had, great outcomes, huge reductions in suspensions, out of school suspensions, in school suspensions. They had improvements in academic achievement. And it wasn't just because of me, but I was a part of it,
I want to hang on a second, because I want to just go back for a minute, because you mentioned that seminal work by Aubrey Daniels, and I think it's worth pausing on that for a moment to just kind of think about how many different people have been inspired either by that book or by the original performance management book. And it's amazing the one-to-many effect that Aubrey Daniels has had, because you're not the first person to come on this podcast and give a very same. I read this book, and it was either that one or the PM book. It's amazing. So I just wanted to note that for a second before. And You went on to describe the outcomes that you generated using some of those techniques. And you're right. Well, I think one of the gifts of those works is that they're so down to earth and so easy to read and accessible that someone, you don't have to be, you don't have to have the highest level of conceptual understanding of behavior analysis to really grasp those concepts and put those things into play.
Yeah, I think the word you just used there was accessible, not just how I think about it. It makes it accessible to your average person, and it's where I fall. This is, if we're gonna change and we're gonna help people, the science has to be accessible. It's got to be understandable. And Aubrey, I don't really have heroes in life, but Aubrey for me is like my hero. I look up to everything he's done. I see. I don't feel like he gets enough credit. This is my own personal, kind of feelings of it. I see a lot of people have done things, but I'm like, man, it's like I think Aubrey did that first. But I'd go back and I look in the references, and I would see all these books that sounded exactly like Aubrey and a lot of stuff that he's written, and I would never see his name. So I'm not sure the reason behind that, but yeah, he was the guy that changed my world.
I had the opportunity to interview him about a year and a half ago, and one of the things he said that was hilarious is that he's like, I was in the field before it was a field. We're talking about at least the behavior analytic piece of OBM. And so I just thought that was really kind of funny because he's really been at it for 30, 40 years or so. So anyway, so you got these things going in the school. I would love to get into some actual tactical examples of some of the ways in which you made changes and things like that. But first, I'd like you to kind of just continue the story before I so rudely interrupted it and kind of bring us up to speed as to where you are right now.
It's actually a good transition because some of the things I did, and then I'll move on. In that school that we actually reproduced in other schools, and ended up writing a book on it. We one of the issues with schools in high poverty, or I should say schools that are having lots of discipline issues, is that the key behavior management strategy that they use are sending kids out of the classroom. And what I call that is going from the ditch to Disney World, somewhere you don't want to be to somewhere you prefer to be. And kids were having a party in the front office, hanging out, and it was very stimulating, very reinforcing to them. Well, they get sent home. So, you have to plug that hole, right? So people are like, well, you got to make them, create an environment where they want to stay. Well, that takes time, man. It takes time to put a system in that and change that culture. Culture change takes a lot of time. You got to change the behavior of a lot of people. A lot of people would say, well, you're the behavior guy, talking about really misbehavior. But, what I had to point out to them was you have to understand that in order to change the students' behavior, we have to change the staff behavior. This is, performance management. We're doing some different things. So, but I had to plug that hole. So I created something called the reflection room. And it was rooted in some simple science. Since that time, we actually have new iterations of it called the quick room. And it's really an alternative to suspension, alternative to detention, alternative to timeout. It is a timeout. But it's rooted in some very simple processes. We have multi-timers. We have a computer signaling program. We have intervals where if you do certain tasks, you can earn your way out and actually get out, sooner than later. We actually put that in a couple of high schools, and we had like 65% reductions, up to 65% reductions in out-of-school suspensions. It was huge, man. Saving almost 18,000 hours in this one school of kids being sent home. So they were in school, and we had large reductions. I think 30-something% in-school suspension. So you had to plug that hole first, because they're still going to be sent out, So we got to make sure that that's not part of the problem. I know that doesn't solve the problem. The first things we wanted to do is engage the students, with learning in the classroom. That's your best behavior management strategy right there.
Good instruction, yeah.
Yeah, good instruction, man. Create an environment where the kids want to be. They feel like they're getting something. But I did simple things like, like in school-wide PBS, they have, they put posters up, and people think that somehow, like if you put a poster up or you write some procedure somewhere, that kids are going to read the poster and be like, oh, okay, I'm supposed to be quiet in this area. I'm supposed to put my hands by my side, or I'm supposed to walk in a straight line. And just having those posters up are going to bring these kids under, instructional control. And that's just not the way it works. So what I had to do was put these in an area where the teachers would see them, and I would teach the teachers what to do in the area, and then I'd pair myself with that. When they would see me, it would actually change their behavior, and then I could reinforce them for doing it, and what we call these quick wins. And this would be in like large areas that were easy to change and that were very visible to people. So the hallways, the cafeteria, morning arrival, dismissal, these are all areas that people could see, these large scale areas where if you can make these small changes in teacher behavior that didn't require a lot of effort on their part, they would see big changes within the culture and the environment there. So we did those things, and I would pump them back, maybe email at the end of the day, say, hey, you know what, walked by 10 of you today, and 8 of you were prompting the appropriate behavior. I heard you reinforce. I heard you correct it using a quiet tone of voice or whatever it was that I shared with them. And then again, because I was like reinforcing them through this simple email and showing some data how it was impacting discipline, my presence would prompt all these behaviors with them. So it just became like it would build on itself, and we started to change the culture, because in a big school, you have to change the behaviors of a lot of people. So that's a nice place to do it, because it also built trust in me. They believe, all right, hey, this guy actually knows what he's doing. It set me up to actually reinforce them. So that's something simple that we did there. We took those kind of premises, and I went and worked with a guy named Dr. Scott Neal. He was supporting a school, and he was struggling again with misbehavior. And we put these very simple processes in place. Again, arrival, dismissal, cafeteria, transitions in the hallway, and having a place where you're going to send the kids out. Having a coding system for sending them out. Because by the way, you're in schools, right? You said you work in schools.
Yep.
So you discipline referrals.
Yes.
So again, we're measuring the behavior of people actually logging in those, inputting that data. And when I've gone into schools that have a lot of misbehavior, it's not an accurate. So.
No, it's a measure of annoyance. Oftentimes, it's like I am or frustration, meaning that if the teacher is sufficiently interrupted, she's interrupted enough times and finally has to make some move, whether it's to send the kid out or do some, send them to a buddy room or some such thing, that then they go ahead and fill the thing out. But it's not necessarily it's not a sensitive measure. That's probably the most charitable way to put it.
Yeah.
It is rather insensitive, and it really just is a matter of, okay, this is past some severity index. It is highly individualized per teacher, and you've got some teachers who will do it more consistently than others. You have some teachers who go the other way and write one up for everything. It's a very inaccurate way of measuring behavior for sure.
You mentioned the buddy room. I'll tell you what, the rule of thumb with the buddy room is nobody writes anything. If you can send the kid out and they're out of your hair for that moment, there's no referral being written on that. That's kind of like how you keep them under the radar. But the simple fix for that, I created a simple coding procedure. I actually did my dissertation on it. And that was, rather than having to, try to get 50 people because to input the referrals, and then have some sort of measure for it, which in PBS, it's like a social validity measure. I feel that, we are writing our additional referrals, which, that's not a very accurate measure either. I just made a code. So for every time somebody was called to the room, that's what you call, office managed behavior. You only call for that kind of behavior. If the student's removed, there should be a referral. So you can count those calls, right? So I said the code 1 is continuous aggression or self-injurious behavior. Code 2 is high magnitude behavior. So I'd have the person, which would be the person receiving the actual call for assistance. Well, I have a code 2 in room 523. They would log that data. So all I have to do is shape the behavior of that person. And there should be a correlation. If you have, 30 calls for assistance, right? 30 codes to classroom, then you should have 30 discipline referrals. So it's a very easy way to measure and then prompt and reinforce the folks for actually inputting those discipline referrals. And we got really good behavior. But the district was thinking, like, what's going on in the school? Your discipline referrals are off the chain. Like, no. What we're doing is you should be reinforcing the school. We're getting accurate data now, so we can actually know if we're making a change or not. Because to your point, you'd have some teachers that just didn't give a crap. They wouldn't put their referrals in. The other teacher was like, I want this kid out of here, so I'm going to log every single referral that there is. And so you're looking at that. You're like, why do I have 100 referrals coming from, grade group 3 last month. And, but I know most of the behavior issues are coming out of grade 5. It's because the teachers are writing more referrals and the others aren't. So,
yeah, it's amazing that the way in which we as behavior analysts look at data versus the skepticism with which we look at data versus other professions, certainly. And I don't mean that in a soapboxy way, but it is noteworthy when you see people look at information without any type of critical eye, and it's a tad scary at times.
Listen, brother, you need to get on your soapbox with this one, because that's what separates our field. You know what I mean? Data. It's what separates our field. Data and, obviously intervening based on some sort of function. So instead of just doing stuff. So anyways, just to make a long story short, repeated this process. And I end up doing it in a couple of schools with Dr. Scott Neal, and we end up creating a school turnaround team, had some success there. And I ran into, Dr. Ken Wagner. You know Ken? He works for Aubrey Daniels International.
Yeah.
Oh, super cool guy, man. I went to an educational conference, and there was a panel, and I heard these guys speak, and I saw he was from, ADI, and I thought, well, I'm going to kind of hear what he has to say. Well, somebody said something, and it wasn't stupid, but it also wasn't that smart. And he wasn't, whoever it wasn't a behaviorist, clearly. But Ken just handled it so beautifully, and he handled it with just, some simple behavior principles that just made some simple sense. I'm like, man, I like this guy. Not only I like what he has to say, and I like how he has to say it, because to this point in my career, I haven't liked the way that everybody has approached the science, how they had to say things. From my history, my experience, I've run into some folks that have been like kind of holier than thou. They kind of, it's almost like and I suppose this is in any field, almost like a classism. Well, I have this degree, or I went to this school, or I did this, and I'm like, all right, that's great that you have that knowledge, but how are you conveying it? How are you disseminating it? How are you engaging people with it? And Ken just had that way. So I'm like, again, I like what you have to say. I like how you say it. So I just went up afterwards and introduced myself, and I said, I believe that OBM holds this key to, changing schools across the country. And I've been using some of the simple principles from, that are in Aubrey's book. And, I'd like to chat more about it with you. And he said, here's my number. And I called him up. Well, I ended up getting a scholarship to ADI for a week. Got to spend time there and learn from him, Bart Severin, Francisco Gomez, who is a super cool guy, man. We're still friends. And, of course, Nick Weatherly, who, you interviewed, and, we're still collaborating on some things together. And I got to meet Aubrey, and again, it just continued to open my eyes more, and kind of brought this information back. And, it just accelerated my own performance by just, learning some of these simple principles, and, end up, leaving the school. I ended up actually, by the way, becoming an assistant principal, because I felt like there was almost like, and I suppose it's any area, but it's like positional authority. Your position was respected more than your performance. So I thought, all right, well, then I'm going to go back and I'm going to become an administrator. So I became an administrator, got put in an alternative school, of course, because of my behavior background, had a large impact on some of the major behavior there. In mid-year, they yanked me out of there and put me into their most struggling school, it was an elementary school, and law enforcement told me they were being called out there 2 to 3 times a week. Can you imagine that? In
elementary school, yeah.
Yes, man, yes. And again, reapplied these quick win strategies, and I only had to call law enforcement one time. It was for a Baker Act. Again, very simple processes, man. I found in some of these high poverty schools that the kids are being treated like they're in a detention center. It's not bad people. It's good people. Just, they're good observers of their own behavior, because they're seeing the kid, in the moment when you tell them to sit down and shut up, but they sit down and shut up, but they're not seeing the ripple effect of all that and how it's not working systematically, and also all the other ethical issues with that. So, made some simple changes there, took over as COO for a company that had a clinic in a school up in Melbourne. And now I'm home with Positive Behavior Supports Corporation as a director of school improvement. And this is just a badass company, man. Just like it's they've got the mission that I value, and that is like it's families first. You know, they don't just talk the talk; they walk the walk. Like you feel cared for. You know, you feel like, I don't know, man. It just what I really have always wanted, to be surrounded by a bunch of people who are just like very, very cool people, very caring people. Money is not the bottom line. You know what I mean? Wanting to provide quality services, wanting people to, you know, be engaged in their work, and you know, it shows not just in the talk, but it shows in the walk, and that's where I'm at right now.
Are you looking for a new job, but you're overwhelmed with all the emails that you're getting from various ABA agencies? What if there was someone who was in your corner and could help you find the perfect job placement? Well, that person exists. Barbara Voss has been working as a recruiter for over 30 years, and her company, HRIC, specializes in placing BCBAs in permanent full-time positions throughout the United States. Barbara has been placing BCBAs since 2011, so she knows our business, and she offers personalized service to any BCBA looking for a new position. She also helps companies looking to hire BCBAs too. Here are just some of the things Barbara can help you with. She can provide information about salary ranges in different markets across the country. She can help you write your resume. She can coordinate and prepare you for the interview process, and even help negotiate the right salary for you. And best of all, there are no charges to any candidate for all of these services. When you're ready to make a change and want to work with someone who will listen to you and understand what you need in a new position, contact Barbara at HRIC. To schedule a confidential discussion, head over to hricolorado.com. Again, that's hricolorado.com, and hit the contact button to connect with Barbara. You won't be disappointed. Cool. So you went over a bunch of things that I one of them, which I want to kind of go back on and hover on for a little bit, is the so when you were pulled out of the alternative school and went into that school that was in, sounds like it was more or less in crisis.
It was.
What were some of those? What was the low hanging fruit that you went after in terms of procedures and policies and interventions?
Yeah. So the quick one.
Yeah,
right?
quick. So, and we should also note that that's the name of a book that you and Manny wrote, right?
Yeah, that's right. Oh, but Manny's part of my story too. I did the same thing with Manny I did with Ken. I heard Manny speak. I'm like, this is a cool dude. I like what he has to say, and I like how he has to say it. I reached out with him and said, I've got this stuff. Let's write a book together, and we did. And it's the Quick Wins: Accelerating School Transformation Through Science, Engagement, and Leadership.
And longtime listeners will remember Manny. Manny Rodriguez has been on the show a couple of times in the past. So just wanted to point that out. I can't remember the episode numbers off the top of my head, but I'll put those in the show notes.
He's a good guy, man. He's, again, one of those guys that is just a good disseminator, you know. Anyways, in fact, Manny came to the school, and we actually worked in the school together. He wasn't working for the school board, but he was working for ABA Technologies, and we collaborated on some things together, again, some quick ones. So here are a couple. I looked at some data, and parents weren't happy. Staff was, were getting ready to leave, and by the way, when you use our strategies, obviously, we had, in all the schools I worked in when we did this, we had a, high retention, and attrition in schools, especially schools of high poverty, to be huge. I've seen up to 80%. That was very unusual. I see research that shows 65%, but, at least half the people turn over, it's crazy. So, all right. So here's one. When we came in there, all the kids, the entire school, and I'm not sure how this evolved at this point, 650 kids were put in two hallways. So imagine the school is kind of like a square, and, imagine a hallway kind of going out in a square, and two of these hallways were kids sitting against the wall, facing each other, and the rule was that you had to have what they call level 0. You had to sit there quietly. So you come in, you can't say a word to all these kids, but you're facing all these kids. So you can imagine all the staff. They had like 15 staff in this hallway and 15 staff in that hallway. So if you can imagine, the kids would be, of course, man, they're snickering, they're trying to talk to each other. So now the staff are put under conditions, because these are rules where they're walking up that hallway telling the kids they need to sit down and be quiet. All morning long, man. I mean, can you imagine that? It's not fair for the staff. It's not fair for the kids. And I'll say again, that there was probably some reason at the time that they did it. It's not. not bad people doing this stuff. It's people that just don't understand the principles of behavior, right? And this is why we need to really get into schools and, and education more. So what we did was we just divided and conquered, and that is we divided up because there were many hallways. So we put the kids and we had them line up on the wall when they came in the morning in front of their classroom. They sat against the wall. We put some books out there so they could read the books. And we said, you can talk, but we want you to talk at level 1. It's like a whispering voice. Man, right away, we had an immediate change in behavior and misbehavior. And before we did it, I took a look around and I'd walk up down the hallway and I could see, I did like a frequency count, and honestly, we were getting like 1 to 30 ratio of positive and negative interactions, 1 to 30. That's huge. And so I gave a little training, and when I train, we talk about that and talk about this in this upcoming book with Dick. I give them real behavior skills training. You know what I mean? I put them in the hallway, and we do some repetition. I talk about what we're going to do, the vision, and I give them lots of repetition. I pretend I'm the child, and I get every staff that's out there to be able to get lots of rehearsal with feedback from me. And then since I gave the training and I'm also the assistant principal in the school, they know this was the expectation. I would use circles around this, around the school, up and down the hallways constantly, greeting the staff, right? So modeling for them, thanking for them for being at their post, reinforcing them for, reinforcing the kids. If they were not correcting the kids correctly, I would, instead of going to correct the student myself, I would ask them if they remember what they're supposed to do, or prompt them to do it themselves, right? And stand next to them. So I did some sort of pairing with them. And man, within a week, we had all the hallways, turned around. And I would take a little bit of the lagging indicators here, and this is where our discipline referrals. And by the way, I had to shape this up there as well in the code. And I pumped that out, hey, because you guys were standing at your post, because you guys were greeting the kids, because you guys were, doing A, B, and C, we had a 36% reduction in codes in the morning time. So that was one. Here, a simpler one was one of the parents were upset. And when you came in, the kids, when they're being dropped off in the morning, were having to get out of their car on the opposite side and walk between cars. And when the cars were leaving, it was congesting everything. So the parents were pissed off. They're honking the horn. It was dangerous for the kids. So all we did was reverse the whole process. So the kids would get out of the side where it was safest, closest to the sidewalk, and it improved the flow of traffic, so it wasn't interfering with things. That was a quick one. The cafeteria, again, a huge one, man. We did some things in there. I actually detailed this in the Quick Learn book, but we put some very simple processes in place there, like staff were, the teachers were not showing up on time. So if you show up late, things back up, and the lines end up getting stagnant, and the kids get frustrated because they're late for lunch and they're arguing with each other, So we kind of reshaped the lines and reshaped where they sat out, and we put some simple process in place. But now you've got these large areas that are very visible to people. Oh, by the way, when the kids came in the morning or at the end of the day, one of the issues were they were running. Well, that was one of the assessments of behavior we need to tackle. We changed that whole arrival and dismissal process, at least in regards to kids running, by adding one word, and that was the word back. Instead of telling the students to walk, we would say walk back. And if you think about, how easy that was to do, and the ramification of that, because it was some sort of simple punishment to apply, the other kids got to see it occurring, it built some sort of, trust or self-efficacy, as Bandera would call it, and people's ability to actually apply these strategies and get an outcome that's desired, So that was a very simple strategy to use. So those are illustrations of quick wins. And once you did that, then we could get into maybe some of the classrooms, right? But you had to kind of help the teachers and the staff believe that, change could happen. And this is how you help them believe.
So the tackling of the large congregate areas of the school facilitated getting a little deeper dive into the nitty-gritty of the classroom. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And it built buy-in. If you're a behavior analyst, you go to work in somewhere and people don't believe in the science, they don't believe in what you have to do. You can't force the science on people. You have to reinforce them with it, right? You have to show them that it will work. And I know one of the things that we talked about is, what do you do when you go in a classroom to make change? Well, one of the issues, say, with PBS school-wide or even classroom management, if you're working with a teacher, if you try to tackle things that are too big, you won't make a change. But rather trying to tackle all classroom management, you apply these same principles in the classroom. Where let's just tackle this area, and that's getting the kids to line up, or getting the children's attention. That's a very important one, right? Teaching attention signal, prompting and reinforcing that, correcting when they're not. That's a simple process for doing it. But if you can have some sort of measure of like, hey, here are the kids that were on task, here are the ones that attended to you, this is the number, and here's who weren't. I want you to do this strategy, teach them how to do it, and then pump back some data showing them that they've got more kids to attend to them when they use their signal. Now you're getting buy-in with the teacher in the classroom.
All right, so I see this all the time in my consultation work. Teacher has some sort of auditory cue. It's either this clap that we've all heard 100 times, which I'm not going to repeat here in front of my microphone. I don't want to blow anyone's eardrums out. Or they'll have a bell chime, or some other type of thing. And one of the things I always do, and usually I'm consulting to a specific individual, I'll note whether or not they attend to it or not. And most of the time, the kids that I'm doing assessments on don't. But I also know that they're not the only ones. And usually what the teacher does when they observe that not everyone responds to that cue is they'll do it again. And then maybe a third time, but usually it's followed up by some sort of comment or something like that, or they just kind of ignore it and kind of, or let it go and move on. Either way, that auditory stimulus is not resulting in the for half or more of the students the desired response. So what are some ways that you found successful to correct that?
Well, so first of all, you and I both know that if the students aren't following the expectations, that's because of what the teacher's doing, right?
Sure.
Or not doing. So,
and I'm thinking from the teacher's perspective.
Yeah.
If I'm going to pull this teacher aside,
yeah,
and if they're receptive, what am I saying to them?
Yeah, I'm going to have to go back on this now. I want to start from the beginning because it's always difficult once you come in mid-year with a teacher, but we have to all the time, right? So,
yep.
I want to start with at the beginning of the year, the most important time in the school year in terms of behavior are the first 22 days. We'll say even the first 10 days of school. And the very first, experience that these children have with the teacher, what are they doing? What are they saying? What are the expectations? The first thing they should be teaching them, is to get the attention signal. And the simple way to do it, there should be some sort of auditory signal and also visual, right? Because sometimes maybe a kid's not hearing it, or maybe somebody sees it from the corner of their eye, the hand comes up, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or whatever it is. And they should teach it in this way. When they first get the children's attention, they should thank them. And the goal should be that they're trying to get their attention within 3 to 5 seconds. So if it took them 15 seconds, initially we say that, hey guys, that wasn't that bad. We did it in 15 seconds. Our goal is 3 to 5. Let's see if we can get in 12 seconds next time. So we have to collectively shape the behaviors of the classroom. And then you bring it down, and you can set up some fun things at the beginning, right? Some simple reinforcers for hitting some of those sub goals. That's a very simple way to do it. But one of the big mistakes that the teachers make when they initially teach their attention signal, and this happens at conferences as well, or when I give it to adults, it's not just kids, it's anybody, is that when they go to get the attention signal, they won't wait for all the kids to attend. And if you start teaching or giving your lesson or giving your instruction or directive and all the kids aren't attending, what do the kids learn? They learn this. A teacher doesn't really mean for me to stop, look, and listen. They mean for me to stop, maybe look and whisper out of the corner of my mouth. And that spreads like wildfire very quickly. So coming back to what to do with the teacher, it would be setting up something. You got to bring reinforcement back in the picture, and maybe giving a little bit of measure and say, you know what, class, I'm going to challenge you. I noticed that when I give the attention signal, it's taking about 12 to 15 seconds. I'm getting about 80% of you. Let's see if we get about 90%. If you hit 90%, here's what we're going to do. And having some sort of fun kind of reinforcer. Obviously in elementary, they like some different things than, the secondary. Secondary likes a lot of things that have to do with social reinforcers. Elementary, they want to be line leaders. They want to get little tickets that they can trade in for trinkets. So all these kind of, extrinsic things, but, pairing that up with some sort of reinforcement. And if you can shape that with the teacher, they're going to be a lot more likely to want to work through some other things with you and maybe even get involved with some of their instruction. I
see. Are there other kind of big picture class management things? Obviously getting their attention is something that can give you a foothold onto other other types of desired practices and things along those lines. But because when I work in schools, sometimes what I'll do is I'll, at least for just general classroom management, and if we're just looking at like attending at circle time or attending to a lesson, I'll typically use the good behavior game. But that doesn't always work out as well as for reasons I can get into later. But what are some keys beyond attending, or once you have attending that you move on to from there that are typically helpful, that represent some of those quick wins that you were referring to earlier?
So I got a very cool colleague, Anika Costner, and she's helping me with these school improvement efforts. And we created a classroom management process called Calm Classroom Management. And in it, we have something called the Big Five. It's a framework that you kind of work through developing classroom management. And it's just simply like having a behavior plan. I mean, one of the first things that teachers need to have are they have to have established routine and procedures. They have to have these things written out. As we know, just like, your streets, the lines in the streets, the stop signs, all these things that, are going to guide what folks need to do. And then there needs to be, behavioral expectations set up, and those need to be written out, right? Because this is your plan. So those are two things, the Big Five. Teachers need to know how to reinforce, right? And I think, fundamentally establishing themselves as a reinforcer. Sometimes that's parenting, but sometimes, most of the time I just want to see them like greeting the children, smiling at them, asking them how their day is. I know I think there's starting to be some emerging research on that, but making sure that they're doing at a rate of 4 to 1, and that's what I'm talking about in terms of the research, but they should be doing a lot more than they're giving corrections. So go ahead.
With regard to the greeting, I remember there was a article in Java, I want to say it was about 10 or 11 years ago, and the intervention, there was some disruptive students in a middle school cluster or team or something like that. And what the intervention was they had the teachers stand at the doorway and greet every student individually as they entered class every day. That was it. That was the only independent variable. And through a multiple baseline, they demonstrated reductions in disruptive behavior on the part of these specific students. Apparently, I mean, if you believe the data, just on that alone, and I think that was just replicated, if I'm not mistaken.
Man, in our area,
that was just kind of mind-boggling. If
if you think about it, but think about this, man. There's something that they call the Circle of Hope, and they start the school year off in my area in some of the schools. I love it. It's a bunch of people that come out and they greet the kids, they make them feel good for arriving. They do it for like the first day or 2 days. And in my opinion, like every day should be the Circle of Hope for these guys, especially in the high poverty where you're greeting them, asking them how they're doing. Let's look at us as adults. Like people tend to think about these kids as like second-class citizens, but if you can imagine walking to work every day and nobody's saying hello to you, asking you how your weekend is, it's like your very presence is like you're just like not, and they're only talking to you when you're, misbehaving supposedly, or maybe not following their expectations to a T. You're creating an environment where people just don't want to be. So, as we know, these oppositional defiant kids, which we know that gets shaped up, right? Just because a bunch of adults are saying bad shit to kids all the time, and they turn into, ODD, which is just like, man, you're always, getting on me when I'm doing the wrong thing, but you're never getting on me when I'm doing the right thing and shaping. So I think that's a powerful thing, is just treating the kids like people, man, like treating them like people that are valued. And again, it's not because teachers are bad, because they're very good and they want to do the right thing. They don't understand behavior principles, and what happens is they start to find errors in the environment, and then bias confirmation pops up where misbehavior becomes the discriminative stimulus, and they're only recognizing those things instead of all the other things, and they be kind of rigid, and they forget kind of like the good people that they are, and they're like, I've got to control, and this is how they think about it, I've got to control this behavior. Not create a culture where the kids want to be by using these simple, kind of humanistic approaches, which are, evidence-based, the root of the science, they work. So establishing themselves as a reinforcer, that's one of the ways that you do it. It's routine procedures, behavioral expectations, reinforcement, correction, right? So it's one of the issues where PBS actually, in some of their earlier research, you could find, ways to punish, do this, that, and the other. But some of the trainings I initially went on didn't focus on that too much because people have fear that, okay, people are just going to go right to using punishment. And they do, because it's easy to use and they see it work for them. But you just can't. What I noticed that teachers fall back on this for punishment. Besides sending kids out of the classroom, they fall back on reprimand. And reprimand works for about the first 2 weeks. And then it starts to lose its power because there's nothing paired with it. And so teaching teachers how to reinforce, right, but also correct. They've got to make sure that they have some sort of pre-planned corrections. I like to, have them create a menu where it's listed out, all right, here are my most frequent behaviors, and kind of classify it in terms of the magnitude of the behavior and have some sort of correction pre-planned, because we can't consider the function for every kid in the classroom, right? We got to have some sort of standard for approaching the classroom as a whole, something that's going to impact most of the class, maybe not every student. So they've got to understand how to do it, and they have to understand how to deliver it in a way that's not nasty, that says, man, hey, I hate to give you this correction, or this punishment, but I'm going to do it because I know it's going to help you in the future, like as a coach might do it, or a good coach. And the last one of the 5, and it's questioning strategies, right? To engage the students. This is the most important thing. And we think about this as like learn units. And if you engage the students in the work through good questions, right? Not always telling them, not boring them to death. It's like, I'm sure you've been to a presentation, in these conferences where somebody bored the, living whatever out of you. And you're thinking about, all right, what do I got to do here? Or, what's my laundry list? Or, I wish I would have been in another place.
That's right. What am I doing for lunch?
Yeah, man, so this is the first line. So those big 5 are very important. So they have to work from that framework, man. Okay. But yeah.
So let's take those through, because we kind of went through those kind of, I interrupted a bunch of times and stuff like that. So let's just do 1 through 5 real quick. You don't have to define every one of them, just so we have the list here. So
I want people to think about it as like a behavior plan, right? So in the behavior plan, which is your classroom management plan, the teachers need to have routines and procedures. What do kids do when they come in the room? How are you taking attendance? What happens with dismissal? When you hand in paperwork, where do you put it? This stuff needs to run automatically, and teachers need to actually write this stuff out. What are the behavioral expectations, right? As part of the classroom management, what should you do during this activity, or what should you do during that activity in terms of, are you allowed to talk? Aren't you allowed to talk? Are you allowed to get out of your seat? What do you do if your pencil breaks or something like that? It's got to be written out. How are you going to reinforce the desired behavior that you see? Are you using praise? Are there some other things that you're including in it? Are there group reinforcers as a classroom? How are you going to correct behavior? This is number 4. When it occurs, you need to have this kind of written out. And by the way, your listeners, I've written an article on this on LinkedIn, a couple on misbehavior. One is good teacher, bad behavior, and the other one is functional discipline, or talk about, creating a menu. But I would, these first 4, routines and procedures, behavioral expectations, reinforcement, and correction, I would create a framework, and then I would engage the students in filling some of the pieces out. So for example, say, hey class, I want to work on, calling out. Calling out's distracting. It makes so you don't learn as much because I have to attend to that, and I don't want to be disruptive. When you sit in your seat and you do the right thing, here's the things that you can earn for doing that, or you're gonna get to learn. You got to get to do this, A, B, and C. But let's say it's a classroom that is very disruptive. You might have to put some additional things in, right, to bring them back under instructional control. Let's talk about what happens if you don't follow instruction, if you call out, and engage them into what kind of consequences might occur. They might say something like you need to send them out, or you need to call their mom, or give them a suspension. Then it puts you in a position to be a good guy and say, wait, chill out, man. I don't want to have to do that. Right. What if I just give you a demerit? If you get 5 demerits, it means you got to give me an action plan. You know what I mean? Or for every time you do this thing, it's time out off your favorite activity over here. Something very simple. Then, of course, again, that 5th one, those questioning strategies, that's for the teacher. And have you ever heard of higher order thinking? Have you heard of like Webb's or Bloom's taxonomy?
Yes.
Yeah. So engaging kids and thinking, man, and that is an amazing behavior management strategy, and it has a good outcome in that it's linked to learning. And so if teachers teaching to a standard and you're asking questions that are related to that standard, getting them to think about it, that is your best behavior management strategy. But the teachers need to be taught better, which I know we were just going right into that now.
All right, so they need to establish routines, they need to establish behavioral expectations, they have to have a reinforcement strategy, they have to have correction procedures, and then the questioning strategy. Those are the 5.
I call them the big five. Yep. Anika and I came up with that.
All right. Awesome. So, from a teacher preparation standpoint, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say none of this is being taught in our schools of ed, or at least, unless someone gets very fortunate in terms of the school that they choose.
Okay. All right. So if I get on my soapbox here and I just start like puking all over this, I want you to just pull me back. All right.
All right.
The viewers can't see you right now, but wave at me or something like that. Pull me down because this is like
get off the ledge.
Yeah, get off the ledge, because I will go. I go deep on this. So I'll talk about this in a little bit, but as you know, like I'm a former fighter, and I'm a professional mixed martial arts coach. And so the analogy I make is that my first day walking to the gym, I took a beating. You heard me talk about this.
Right. You got your nose broken, right?
It's still broken to this day, man. You probably hear the little nasal pitch, man. It's still broken. The first day I found myself in there with a professional fighter. And this is happening all the time with our teachers. And you think about for whatever reason, whatever conditions were occurring at that time, I came back every day, take a beating day after day, bloody nose, everything. Why I kept in there, I have no idea. I just wasn't that bright. I don't know who, what it was selecting, but it selected me for some reason. But the teachers are being thrown in the schools unprepared to meet the demands of the classroom. Leaders are unprepared to meet the demands of the school because telling teachers how to teach is insufficient for them to be able to actually teach in the class. Or same thing with leaders, telling them there's far too much theory. I'm not saying this is all higher education, because there are some very good schools out there that actually give great theory and give adequate rehearsal and feedback and performance-based scenarios so people get to problem solve and make decisions. We need a lot more of this in higher education, but there's not. This is missing across the board. This is a big piece of the puzzle. So they're learning on the job, and they're learning at the expense of our children. They're learning at the expense of their own mental health. They're learning at the expense of taxpayers at the tune of $2.2 billion to $7 billion a year because of teacher attrition. I mean, it's crazy. Right now, we have a shortage of over 100,000 teachers. So they are not getting sufficient training. And just because you're a content expert in something does not mean you can instruct. Right, having the knowledge doesn't mean that you can convey that knowledge. That's a critical piece of the puzzle. And if we step up and we look at some of the contingencies here, and I think AB8 is actually a really good job in a lot of their higher ed, from what I've experienced and what I've spoken to people about. But if you think about what are the reinforcers for most, we'll talk about what gets professors tenure. Do you know
publications?
This?
Research, getting grants and publication, publishing work and things like that.
That dude. So think about this, man. This is what gets you to stay on, not measures of performance, right? So you have in some of the research I did, I couldn't find any literature, and I had another researcher did a meta-analysis of it. And I can't quote the name because I'm not good at that, remember people's names, but they could not find one bit of research that found a measure of actual performance as something that would help professors, get their tenure. So they're not being measured by anything that was linked to performance. It's those things that you said, and also I would add in, some social validity, as long as nobody's complaining about you too hard. But again, not a knock on them. This is not their fault.
It's just the system.
Right. It's being set up by the institution, man. These guys of course you want to keep your job, and there's some amazing professors out there. I've had quite a few of them. I've been very fortunate. But in Florida, I don't know about in other states, and I know this is in some other states, we actually have that you can, because there's a shortage of teachers, so they're doing the best they can, that all you got to do is pass some sort of, certification test, to get in, and then you can fulfill the requirements. I think you have like a year to 3 years or something like that to fulfill some other requirements. You got to go back to school, learn A, B, and C. But again, remember, they're coming in there just because you know about math or about world history does not mean you can teach it. I mean, teaching is highly complex, man. Engaging your learners, and so they walk away learning something that they can apply, man. Teachers do not get the respect that they need. Now, and come back to leaders, teachers are not getting enough repetition. Leaders get none. I mean, it's all theory, right? It's all theory that they're getting, and they're learning on the job. And so if you're an assistant principal and you're coming in, or a vice principal, and you're learning under a school leader, if that's not a good school leader, an effective school leader, you're really having some, bad things modeled for you. And hopefully you're able to kind of discriminate what's good and what's bad, maybe learn for that. But one person, there's some good research on that. One person, the school principal, can impact student achievement by up to 25%. So you think about that, 25%. Think about the opportunity for OBM to come in there and support, higher education with training teachers, or to support schools, and schools with bringing out the best in the AP and the teachers, so they can bring out the best in the teachers or in the students. But there's just not any of that going. There's no behavioral principles going on in higher ed for pairing these guys, or for helping that knowledge transfer into the natural environment, because we need that knowledge to sustain, right? It's not just about getting that reps in school. It's also about how is that going to transfer.
Right. And I think another thing too is, are you familiar with fit learning?
Actually, I've heard of it, but I couldn't give you any details on it.
The fit learning Atlanta office, I guess, chapter, division, whatever the separate units are called. Anyway, they just post something on their Facebook page of it was just basically another troubling article, like in addition to behavior stuff, like some of these, some schools of education are kind of almost anti-science in many ways. And this was not necessarily related to promoting appropriate behavior and remediating problematic behavior, but it was more about reading instruction and how, sometimes these schools of ed are almost eschewing well-established, scientifically validated methods of instruction. But anyway,
man,
it's
true, man. But again, I wrote an article a while back. It's on B-Side 21. It's called "Fighting Words in ABA," and I talk about like our language, and how we got to do a better job with it. I have to, I have to think about in our field, we have to do a better job of disseminating, and because we've been paired with, again, you have somebody that learns, and even in our own field, just because you understand the principles of science doesn't mean that you can apply it in a way that's going to engage the folks that you're working with it and create a want for you to be able to use it, or create a want for the science. So you have to learn to use the science, again, to reinforce people into it. So I really avoid, using some of the words that are in our field, some of the jargon. I would say most of it early on, in fact. And sometimes I go into places, and if I feel like they've had bad experience with behavior analyst, I don't even tell them I'm a behavior analyst. I'm a coach. I'm helping you, and I have experience in education. And then I start to pair some of the science with it, right? So I establish a want for myself and what I can do. And I say, hey, by the way, that was the science that you just used, So I kind of pair that way. So we're really reinforcing them into it. But you're right. They're, they're kind of almost anti that, but we have to, we have a kind of a call to action here, and that we have to change that, and we can.
For sure. So you just hit on something I wanted to talk about. So you said you call yourself a coach, right? I have my business card floating around my desk right here, and it says consultant. So what is, from your point of view, the difference between a coach and a consultant?
So that's a good question.
In the context of what we do as behavior analytic practitioners, I guess.
Sure. So I think, I see a consultant as somebody that goes in, they're really kind of like sharing their expertise with somebody, right? They're being brought in to help them with some, in some specific area. I need your help with this, and you're an expert in that. And so, what can you help me do, to improve this? So, in we haven't talked about this, but I mentioned the book, so I'm not trying to get a plug in here, but, Nick and I have spent the last 8 months in writing the book, Deliberate Coaching, a toolbox for accelerating teacher performance. And what we have to do is we begin to separate things like training from coaching, right? So it's a big, a lot of the processes you use in both are the same, but like we have to kind of define it functionally. So as a consultant, you might use training as an intervention, right? You might use coaching as an intervention. But when you go in as a consultant, one of the things that you have to do is go in and find out, hey, what's going on, what problems exist, is it an antecedent issue? Do people need training? Are they missing processes? Do they need some sort of resources? Is there an issue with feedback? So you have to address it from, functionally, why aren't people doing what they need to do? And then you have to, once you figure that out from some sort of root cause assessment, then you have to address it. Now, if training was an intervention, you decide that's the approach you want to do. Training, as we posit it, has to do with skill acquisition, right? So I need to make sure people have the skills necessary to perform the job. Coaching, we define functionally, we say coaching is concerned with the transference of those skills into the natural environment. So I want to give you an example, and and I'm going to bring it back to the fight game. In my gym, this is where I kind of came up with the concept, again, Nick and I evolved it. I would have fighters look amazing on the bag, right? You're familiar with the gym. They'd be hitting the bag and they'd be hitting mitts, and their skills would look fantastic. And you look at them, you think, man, this guy can fight really, really well, And then you look and they'd go into the fight and they wouldn't perform these skills at all. In fact, you would look into sparring, which would be simulation, right? As close as you can get it to actual fight. And they would only be performing maybe a third of what was in the repertoire. So thinking like, ooh, what is this? They have the skills, but they're not applying the skills under these natural conditions. So you have to take a different approach. Using some of the same concepts. Obviously, you have a pinpoint behavior, you have, a way to measure, you got to be able to give feedback and reinforcement, but you need to give people repetition under conditions that are very close to the actual natural environment. And that's one of the processes for helping it transfer, and that's through these simulations. But I can't teach you, if I was teaching you how to slip a punch, right? Hands up, and it has, a task analyze, and I break it down in these small steps so you understand it, and I start to shape up these steps, and you know how to do it. Now I'm going to put you into the cage to fight, or the ring. If the opponent I put you in there is throwing all sorts of different strikes at you, and you're trying to learn this new behavior, you're going to fall back on the old habits, what's worked for you in the past, just to keep safe. So that skill is not going to transfer. I've got to create conditions where you get lots of repetition with it under semi-live conditions, so you start to create a habit of using it because you're getting in touch with reinforcement, i.e. this thing's working. And avoiding a punch, right, and setting yourself up to deliver a punch in combat sports is, an important thing for people. So what I'll do is, instead of having the opponent throw all these different punches at you, I'll have him throw maybe just the right hand at you, right? And maybe it's the right hand at 50% and then 70%. And then pretty soon he's throwing at 100%. And now you're getting lots of repetition doing this under this live condition. And it's giving me the opportunity to give you feedback and shape those nuances of the behavior. And it's increasing the likelihood that you're going to use it in actual full sparring conditions, because then I start to fade in other strikes. Now it's the 1-2 and the 1-2-3 and the kicks come in. So pretty soon you're able to use this skill under, fight conditions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I know we had a little interesting sidebar about tag teaching when we were at HABA, and you're talking went through a little bit more detail in terms of like breaking down the actual punch and how do you, turning your hips and things like that. So, and I know you don't use tag teaching, but it sounds like something that would be that might help that process along a little bit. You get feedback without kind of interrupting the performance.
Absolutely, man. Agreed. And we have certain cues that we use. I have codes that I give to people. But I'll tell you along those lines that in terms of training and in terms of training teachers, coming back to that, is that you can't train teachers in everything. We know that. There's only X amount of time to train, right? So what are the important things? What are those behavioral cusps that we need to train them in terms of instruction? Questioning is one of those things. I think teaching teachers how to task analyze, right? Break things down into small steps, teaching them how to reinforce. I think those are all behavioral cusps, and they're critical. In the fight game, would be, as I mentioned to you, like shifting your weight, right? Having good posture. All these things are fundamental to a bunch of different skills that you're going to learn. All defenses, different strikes that you can access. So they are important. So you can't teach everything, but knowing what are the critical behaviors to teach, building the skills right through training, and then helping those skills transfer into the natural environment through what Nick and I call deliberate coaching.
I see. So, are there? I know you've made a lot of cool analogies to your alter ego, Polygloves, the trainer, right?
Hey.
Are there other aspects of your fighting background that have been conducive to your work with teachers?
Man, I'll tell you, like, I was bullied growing up. I was just like, it's funny. I heard Dr. Pat Fryman talk about contrast. I got to hear him speak for the first time. It was just through a online program through FIT. I'm actually finishing up. After all these years, I've decided to go back to my BCBA. Dr. Martinez Diaz kind of convinced me to go back when I'm like, I don't really need it because, I'm really following the OBM path, but I'm glad I did, because it brought me back through, so I've got 14 classes now that I've got under my belt of ABA, and I'm very happy that I did it, but it was a long process, Yeah, I'm stoked for it, man. But I got to hear Pat Fryman speak, Dr. Pat Fryman, and he talked about contrast, right? And so for me, growing up, like I came up in a very loving family, lots of love was shown my way, and we moved into a very kind of rough neighborhood, and being just a sweet kid, I got bullied. And clearly that was why I chose to take one of the paths of fighting. So I kind of see like fighting as an analogy for life, and I don't necessarily mean physically fighting. I never, I was bullied, but I'd never bully anybody. I was always the guy that that would stand up for somebody when they were getting bullied, not to get my butt whooped, until I learned how to fight, But I believe we're all kind of pursuing our own fight. So what I kind of feel like is that, fundamentally fighting's helped me to push through adversity. So right now, like, I feel like everywhere I go, I'm fighting for something. I feel like, fighting for, to bring OBM into education. That's an important thing, and there's a lot of adversity you have to fight through. And we all have some sort of fight. So I kind of feel that is like the framework that I approach life from. But in terms of learning, from the fight game, beyond like having to push through adversity, it's done a couple things for me. One of the things that it did for me is that I was very afraid to public speak, believe it or not, because I love public speaking now, and I still get a little bit nervous, but like, I really like sharing stuff. I like to see people's eyes light up, because like, I'm sharing something that might help them become better, like, I'm sharing, how I follow my passion, and like, because I wasn't surrounded by a bunch of analysts, not this is a bad thing, but like, I kind of thought everybody was using the science to do things everywhere. I didn't realize it was just like isolated, and that's why I started using it in the fight game. That's why I started using like OBM in the schools, because I kind of thought that's what people were doing, but it's not. I'm actually going to be going into work with law enforcement agency pretty soon. I'm like, all right, it's a science. We can use this stuff anywhere. It's almost like I didn't know better not to do it, so I just went and did it because I thought that's what you're supposed to do with the science. So I had to fight. I fought in front of up to 20,000 people, so I got desensitized in terms of crowds. So it helped me to come out of my shell a bit in terms of public speaking, because it just gave me some sort of confidence in that way. I started to pursue that. It's also helped me to understand, I never worked in a lab, and I didn't have somebody that was like guiding me, giving me like deep supervision in that way. Some people are very fortunate to have that kind of thing, but the gym became my lab. And I'm, if anything about me, probably one of my strengths is that I'm just a good observer of behavior, my behavior, the impact of my behavior, others' behavior on me. So I would look to where I was kind of having some sort of success, because I had the heavyweight champion of the world for almost 3 years. I had multiple UFC fighters, and I'm just very fortunate to have stumbled across the science of human behavior, because I know that's what was at the root of it. So I look at kind of like what I was doing early on and say, why is that successful and why isn't it successful? And I do it through this kind of behavioral lens, and when it was successful, I'm like, all right, I need to repeat this. If it wasn't successful, I would think, all right, I need to do this differently, and this is why it wasn't successful, through some sort of behavior principle. So that has definitely helped me. And as I mentioned, like, even seeing like the book Deliver Coaching, being able to kind of get like the difference between training and coaching and the transfer of the skills, man. I mean, that's something that's important in, every profession, because, there's only like a 10% return on investment in terms of training that these companies are putting out. And there's hundreds of billions of dollars being wasted on that. So understanding how to develop skills and help those skills transfer, we have the science for doing it. We're behavior analysts. And so that was kind of my lab, and it's still my lab. I'm still learning. learning. I'm still testing out some things, man. I'm always going to be learning. So, but that's how it's really helped me in terms of myself and also, with the science.
How have you dealt with working with teachers who might be reluctant or perhaps more overtly recalcitrant to receiving assistance? I know teachers can be skeptical. I'm married to a public school teacher. It's kind of like coming in and saying, I'm from corporate, I'm here to help. If it's not done right, you can turn yourself into a real aversive stimulus. But sometimes the help is foisted upon a teacher who wasn't looking for it.
Yeah.
What has been your experience with overcoming those types of obstacles?
Well, I think number one is just the way you just said it. Being authentic and walking in there and saying, man, I'm guessing like they asked me to come out to help you and you don't want the help. You know what I mean? So being authentic, and engaging them in the process for sure. But there's some research on something called stages of concern. Have you ever heard of
that? I'm wondering if it's similar to like the motivational thing, like, where you're pre-contemplative, or I think I've heard something like that. But go on.
The simplest way to think about it is like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What's important to me right now? It's a reinforcement hierarchy. Like what's important to me right now? And if you're a new teacher coming in, like you just want to know where to park and where to clock in and clock out, how to avoid getting into trouble, and where some people are trying to address the teacher, get them to perform these higher level instructional practices. That's not what's important to that teacher who's dealing with little Johnny who's being a pain in the butt in the corner. So addressing the needs that are important to that teacher is a nice way to establish yourself as a reinforcer. So what's important to them, addressing that, knowing that you'll get to those other things eventually. But if you try to force something on them, even though it might be good for them, you're just going to create an enemy. And I've done stupid things like, man, don't ever, ever, ever do this. This was a stupid one. Where I went in, I didn't meet the teacher ahead of time, right? Collected data, and there was a lot of bad stuff going on, and sent them an email with the data, which was just not a good idea. And I remember she sent me back an email saying, your rhetoric falls on deaf ears.
Wow.
Yeah, man. So that was a great lesson for me, and it was just not a good idea, man. Like, you really need to go meet with these people. They're struggling. It's a tough job. They do not get much reinforcement at all. The only time people address them is when there is an issue. There's like these stupid evaluations that take all sorts of time with the leadership, from leadership to actually perform these things. I actually wrote some articles on, ways to improve evaluation in education. But nobody wants to do them. Teacher doesn't want to be involved in it. The leader doesn't want to be involved in it. It takes a ton of leadership time that could be used with actually providing some sort of coaching strategies with the teacher so they can help them perform better. So, I think it's just really about being authentic with them, helping them do something that's meaningful for them, and then kind of progressing from there. Because if you can't establish a want for yourself through some sort of authentic approaches, or like, hey, here, I'm from the district, I'm here to help you. If you take that approach, you're not going to get anywhere, man. And I personally, if my fighters lose a fight, the first thing I think about is like, what can I do differently? If my school wasn't performing well, what can I do differently as a coach? Because I look at, their performance as a measure of me. What do I need to do differently? So if my teacher is not receiving me, I got to think about how can I behave differently for this teacher? And I think, creating want for myself and being authentic, those are two kind of key pieces, and giving them, using a quick win. What can I do to help these teachers that's going to be easy for them to do and is going to result in some sort of outcomes, just like behavioral momentum, and then that way, then we can kind of systematically move on to some other things.
Pretty cool. Well, I think you have given the listeners lots of good food for thought, Pauly. I really appreciate that. So let's close this interview out with some advice that you might have for a newly minted BCBA.
Yeah. All right. So, I got a couple things. This might have been some advice that I wanted. One of the things that helped me was to, find a mentor. Find somebody that is going to last beyond your supervision hours. Somebody that's like seasoned. I mean, some of these people are so. Gosh, man, they're so knowledgeable in the field, and they've made the mistakes. So having somebody to bounce something off of is extremely helpful. When we talk about mentor, that's somebody that's going to, be with you for a while, somebody that can support you, that doesn't mind you bouncing some questions, because, we're all learning every day. That's, one of the first things. I think number two, learn OBM. You don't have to, you already have the knowledge, the fundamental principles for it. But, even if you're working clinically, a lot of times you're working with like other professionals that you need to behave differently, right? Because you're looking for some sort of outcome, like, helping a child behave better or helping them learn. So you got to understand these basic principles. Well, you actually already have those principles, but you just need to broaden your scope and think about how you're going to apply those principles to the folks, to the other professionals in the room. I think, and we both talked about this, but find your passion. You literally possess the ultimate toolbox for making a change in any field. So if you follow your passion and begin to look at it through like a behavioral lens, man, you can change and you can be happy doing the things that you love. Laugh. I don't know. It could be that you love crocheting. If you love crocheting and you want to get in that field, you can teach people to be the best crocheters. I'm not sure if that's a word, but the world is literally your oyster here, as opportunities to practicing AB and OBM outside the clinical world are endless. You just might need to carve out your own path, right? So part of that is that you might have to, sharpen or even develop some sort of your entrepreneurial skill sets. So that would be important. And here's something that happened for me. This will be the last one. I found people who I admired their work and I reached out to them. For example, like Dr. Kevin Polk, he wrote some stuff on the ACT matrix, and I liked what he wrote, man. I thought, all right, I like things that are very simple, right? Simple principles that can be applied by the people. And I'm like, this is fantastic. I like this dude. So I looked him up on LinkedIn, messaged him and said, I like what you had to say and I like how you had to say it. You want to do something together? And he's like, all right, that's cool. Let's do something. So we wrote an article on it's called Fight Science, how to help fighters, manage fear and anxiety through action. Right. And so just taught people how to use the ACT matrix. And that was cool, man. And I did that same thing with Manny. I did it with, Ken Wagner. I did it with this guy, and I've done it along the way, man. So if anything, you reach out to them and just tell them you love their work, because who doesn't want to hear that, to be reinforced? It's a nice way to kind of give some people some credit, and you don't know what kind of doors it might open. There's some really amazing people in the field. So, it might open up a door where you can potentially collaborate with them, especially if you can do something like that's a win-win. And for him, Dr. Polk, it was like, all right, hey, this is kind of cool. We can talk about the ACT in the fight game. That's never been done before. Cool. So made it a win-win. So yeah, those would be some of my suggestions.
With that last one, I don't think this podcast would exist without that strategy. So,
Yeah, man.
So in other words, I think you can't go wrong with cold calling or cold emailing someone whose work you admire, and at least touching base with on one level or another. So, Paulie, this is it's been about an hour and 20 minutes. It's flown right by. So thanks so much for joining me today. The new book will be coming out when? January? February?
Yeah, it'll be coming out in February. So, Deliberate Coaching, a Toolbox for Accelerating School Transformation. Put out by Learning Science International. We're very excited about it, man. It was fun to write with Nick on it. It's a fun book.
All right, I look forward to checking it out. All right, Paulie, thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, brother. It was great talking to you.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.